I need more storage space. I don't know if we're talking about the shop or the house. There's never enough storage space. That's something we always seem to need. You know, I've been doing woodworking for 50 years, and if there's any one item, and I'm talking about furniture items right now, that I've made more than anything else, it's shelving units. Why? Because we need them for books, we need them for clothes, we need them in the kitchen, we need them in the workshop, we need them everywhere. So it seems like I've built a lot of shelving units, and I'm getting ready to do so again. I need some more shelving here in the workshop. Specifically, I'm going to move my drill press over onto this side, and where you won't be able to see it, and I'm going to put a shelf in there. And that's going to give me a place to put some tools that I want to have readily available, okay? It's like I built this thing here at the end of my workbench to put my measurement tools. Well, this is another idea. Rather than a tool wall, I'm going to build a bookshelf. So here's what I'm going to do. I've gone ahead and bought some pine that I'm going to make the shelf out of. I'm not making out plywood because it turns out for what I want to do, I'm just as good off doing some #2 pine. And it's going to end up looking a little bit better. I don't have to worry about edge banding. I don't have to worry about things like that. But in the process, I want to show a variety of techniques in how to put the shelf together. In other words, I'm not going to mount all the shelves the same way. You know, normally you build a shelving unit, you put all the shelves in the same way. I'm going to mount the shelves in different ways so I can show you some different techniques for assembly. So when you make your own shelf, you've got some ideas of what you want to do to put things together. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add stiffeners on all the shelves. Now, if you buy shelves from IKEA or any of the other manufacturers that make these, you know, particle board, or a lot of them nowadays are MDF shelves that you put together, you're going to find that they're very weak. They'll tend to sag over time. Well, I don't want these shelves to sag, so I'm going to put stiffeners on the front edge of all the shelves, which is what you find done on finer furniture, okay? And what that's going to do for me is make it so that my shelves don't sag. These will be able to sit here for a long, long time without sagging. Now, you could ask, why don't I just bite the bullet and buy the cheap shelves? Well, one is because I'm me, and I would rather make it myself. But the other is that if I ever want to move them, have you ever tried to move some of those shelving units they make today? You know, the old ones, it used to be a solid board on the side, even though it was particle board all the way up. You could move it. Nowadays, it's two pieces joined together. You try and move it more than 6 inches and it just collapses. So the shelving unit I'm going to build is going to be able to be put here, and it's going to be all moved if I decide to in the future. Now, I've got about 2 feet of width of space that I can use here, which isn't a lot. And I'm going to make it as high as the drill press, which is 5'9" tall, okay? So those are my dimensions that I'm working with, because it's going to go in that spot. I can move my router table over a couple of inches, but not a whole lot. So I'm pretty much limited by those dimensions. So first thing is to cut the sides. I'm going to make the outside box, but in that process, I've got to keep in mind how I'm going to mount the shelves, and I've got to do some prep work for that in the process. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cut my sides and my shelves off to length. Okay, I've also cut my top piece, which I made a little bit longer so I can overhang the sides by about 3/4 inch on each side. That's just a decorative thing more than there's anything else. The other thing I've cut here is a bunch of 1x2s, and I'm using a select grade for this because I don't want any knot holes in this for strength purposes. Now, these serve a very specific purpose, okay? If you take your average, you know, you bought it at Kmart bookshelf and you put it together, after a while it's going to sag, and that's just the force of the weight sitting on there is going to cause that to happen. Now, this is pine as opposed to particle board or MDF, so it probably won't do it as much. But I'm also going to be putting metal tools on there, so I want to make sure it doesn't sag on me. And the way I'm going to prevent it from sagging is by adding a stringer here that's going to be a support. Basic physics, okay, basic structural physics is that the farther you can get away from the center line with your material mass, the stronger it is. That's why I-beams work, right? You've got an I-beam and you've got two horizontal pieces with a vertical web. The main purpose of the vertical web is to hold the two horizontal pieces away from the center. All your strength is coming from those two vertical pieces. I'm sorry, horizontal pieces, not the vertical piece. And so it doesn't matter how tall it is. Like if you look at some big bridges, you'll see an I-beam that's maybe a foot wide and 3 feet tall. Well, all your strength is from that top piece and the bottom piece, and the web in the middle, the vertical piece, just holds them together. All the strength comes from getting that material away from the center. That's essentially what we're doing. Here, this horizontal piece doesn't have much distance between the center and the outside edges, okay? This little piece of 1x2 is actually stronger as far as holding weight this way than this piece of 1x8, and that's because it's got the material farther away from that center line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to route a rabbet into this, and the rabbet will have this setting into it, all right? And that will make the two of them essentially one piece. It'll be glued and nailed in place. Now, that's why you saw me ripping down the shelves on the table saw, because not only do I have to cut them off to length, but I've got to cut a little material off to make up for the thickness of this, or actually about half the thickness of this. But then I also need to cut a little off the back side, because we need to put some sort of filler in the back side, right? You go buy one of those build it yourself shelves, and you'll have a piece of material for the back, and that piece of material is usually actually cardboard, but it should be, say, like 1/4 inch thick plywood, and that's what I'm going to use, is some 1/4 inch thick plywood that I've got out in my annex. And I could nail it to the outside, and that's the way those units are made. But to do it more properly, like you would build a piece of furniture, I'm going to inset it into the edges of the frame. So to do that, I had to make the shelves another 1/4 inch less deep, okay? So what started out here to be 7 1/4 inches is now 6 3/4 of an inch, taking that 1/4 inch off for the back and the 1/4 inch off for the front. So my next step now is to route these pieces so I can put it together. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and route the sides and the back edge of the top so that they have that space for that back panel to inset into. I've set up my router table with a rabbeting bit in here, and there's a bearing on it which allows me a 3/8 of an inch depth of cut, and then I've lined my fence up with that bearing so that as my piece comes across, the bearing and the fence are all in alignment. And what I need to do is I need to cut a notch out that's 3/8 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. So I'm actually have to make more than one pass, raising the bit in between each pass. So I'll run all my pieces through once, and then I'll reset the bit and run them through again. And I'll probably make about 3 passes to get it up to 3/4 of an inch. So while I was routing the rabbet into all of my front rails, I went ahead and routed my uprights, putting a rabbet into them as well to inset the back panel. And then I also took my top piece, which is actually a little wider, a little deeper than my regular shelves are, and I went ahead and put a beveled edge on it, just stylistically, basically. Some other styles I might use a different sort of a contour, but I went with something simple, or more of a modern style. Okay, so now what I'm ready to do is assemble all these rails. Now, I've made some design decisions as I've gone here and how I'm going to go about making this shelf. I really don't want to go overly complex. It's easy to do that with something like this. And there's different times when you might use different things. Like if I'm trying to do fine furniture, I'll do one thing. If I'm doing shop furniture, I'll do something totally different, okay? And specifically, I'm referring not so much in the details that we could consider to be more of decorative details. I'm talking about how this thing's going to be assembled. For example, I'm putting these front pieces on with glue and brad nails. And the main purpose of the brad nails is to act as clamps holding this together while the glue dries, because I don't have enough clamps to hold them all together. So I may as well use the brads to do that. Now the biggest design decision we have to make in this process is how are we going to attach the shelves to the uprights? If you look at a lot of modern furniture today, you know, I'm talking about the same storage stuff I was talking about before where you assemble it yourself, you end up using shelf pins to put that together. Now, shelf pins are a convenience, and they do their job, and I've had shelves with shelf pins that have lasted for 20 years, so I'm not going to say they're bad, but I will say they're not the best, okay? And my main reason for saying that is because they can and do eventually tear out. Of course, part of that is because those shelf pins are going into particle board or OSB. If you want to do a really good shelf, a really nice, we're talking fine furniture type stuff here, then what you would do is that you would take your shelf and you would cut dados into the uprights. Okay, so if we pretend this is an upright, we cut a dado into it so that the shelf here could actually set into that dado. That's going to give you an incredibly strong joint that's going to last very, very well. It's a great way of doing things. Now, when I'm talking about a cleat, I'm talking about a piece of wood that's maybe 3/4 of an inch square, and the length of the shelf less the space needed for this. So it would go from here to just shy of this. I'd actually mount it a little shy to make sure I've got that spacing, okay? Then I can go ahead and take that shelf, set it in there, and just put a couple brads in it to hold it to those cleats. And I've got all the strength that I ever need. This is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about using a dado. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can cut a dado. The classic way, at least in modern thinking, is to use a dado stack in a table saw or radial arm saw. All right, I can't fit a dado stack very well into my table saw. I have cut dados with my radial arm saw, but a lot of people don't have radial arm saws. The easiest way for a lot of us to cut a dado like this is with a router using a fence. Now, I've cut this with a 3/4 inch wide router bit, and that isn't perfect, and I'm going to show you why. Now, one of the problems we deal with is that if we're talking about pine, if we're talking about regular dimensional lumber, there's a really good chance it's going to have a little bit of a crown into it. It's going to be cupping a little bit, and it's not going to be absolutely flat. You can see here that there's a little bit of a gap, okay? Likewise with this piece, we probably have a little bit of a crown or a cup in it as well. Okay, how do you deal with that? For one thing, if you've got a little bit of cup in an upright, it's probably best to put that to the inside, okay? That will help hide that. And then with your shelves, you put the crown up because it'll eventually flatten out, okay? So we cut the dado, and then we put our piece of wood into it. Now, if you look really closely here, you can see there's a little bit of a gap right there, and there's a little bit of a gap right there, and that's because I used a 3/4 inch bit, and I got a 3/4 inch bit board, and one or the other is off a little bit on size. All right, how do you deal with that? Well, you either put up with it, which is not great, or you use a 1/2 inch bit instead of a 3/4 inch bit, and you make 2 passes. So you would put 2 fences on here. So let's say this is one of our fences here. There's a fence here, and then there'd be a fence on this side, however far it needs to be, so for the router, depending on the base plate of the router, so that I'm cutting this side of it with the router's base plate up against this fence, and this side of it with the router's base plate up against this fence. That would give you a very precise cut. And then rather than being able to just push this in with your hand, there's a good chance you'd have to pound it in with a mallet, but it would be really solidly connected, mechanically speaking. Okay, so I've cut myself a bunch of cleats to use as supports for the shelf. Again, I'm trying to go for an easy way of doing this, okay? And I've also marked my uprights. Now, here's here's one of those places where the old adage of measure twice, cut once is really important. One of the easiest places to mess up measurements is when you're trying to lay out something like shelf locations on two different standards, okay? How do you solve that? You do them both at the same time. I laid them out so that the ends are flush, and I marked right down the middle and made my lines across so that I know they're good. Now these are the lines I'm going to be attaching the cleats to, and I've intentionally cut these cleats a little short so that I can put them, you can see here the rabbet that I cut for the back, okay? So I'm going to put it so that it's just shy of flush with that, and still leave myself about 1 inch of space on this other side, okay? And what that's for is when the shelf comes down, I've got that support along the front edge, the lip, that's going to go right there, okay? And the main thing that's going to hold this together is not nails, although I'm going to put it together with brad nails, it's the glue. The brad nails are really just acting as a clamp, giving me a way of holding it together while the glue has some time to dry. So we'll put the glue on, set them in place. Again, I'm keeping it close to the back, okay? Close to that rabbet. And put enough nails in just to secure it in place. The real strength in this structure that is the shelving unit isn't coming from these cleats that are holding the shelves, especially just using glue and nails. Now, the glue is stronger than nails, and the nails are just there to hold it together while the glue's drying. But I've decided for the corners, specifically attaching the top to the sides and the bottom to the sides, that I'm going to go ahead and use pocket holes. Now, I'm not normally a huge fan of pocket hole joinery, but there are times when it is really, really useful, and this just happens to be one of them. And so I'm going to drill it and put pocket holes in here. Now this is the bottom side of the top shelf that I'm drilling, okay? I'm sorry, let me say that again. This is the bottom side of the bottom shelf that I'm drilling, not the top shelf. I actually can't do this with the top shelf because the top shelf overhangs the edges or the ends of the shelving unit, okay? So I've got to do something different with the top shelf. All right, so now I've got the pocket holes in my bottom shelf, and that'll be hidden. What about the top shelf? Now, I can't very well stand a 6-foot board up in this jig to do that, and trying to hook it on there, maybe if I flipped it on its side, yeah, that'd be a little awkward. Fortunately, my pocket hole jig comes with a solution to that problem. I can take the drilling block, the block that's got the bushings in it, out and put it into this bracket, and this is a smaller bracket that's designed to allow me to do pocket hole joinery, drilling in tight areas. And I can set it to depth just like I can the other one. There's the same markings. It just doesn't have the clamping portion of the jig. All right, so what do we do for that? Well, okay, so I'm going to take this, and I didn't mark this, so let me go ahead and decide where I'm going to put my... I want to put this right smack in the middle, so we'll go right about here. Okay, so I can place my pocket hole jig here, and rather than using the rest of the jig as the clamp, I can just use a small F-clamp. Bingo, now I can go ahead and drill it. The only problem with doing it this way is that the chips don't clear out real well. All right, that's not a real big deal. So let's go ahead and put the other holes in. Okay, so now I've got my pocket holes at the top end of the side pieces to go into the bottom of the top, and I've got them in the bottom of the bottom shelf to go into the side pieces. Now all I got to do is assemble it. Okay, I've got my pieces clamped up to do the bottom shelf, the first part of holding this together. Now, I see a lot of people putting things together with pocket holes without clamping the work. You can do that, but if you really want a good snug joint, it's better to clamp it. So I've got 2 corner clamps here that are holding the sides and bottom together. And then for good measure, I've put a bar clamp here in that's just pulling everything in. So now we can go ahead and put the screws in from the bottom. And you always want to make sure that when you're doing pocket hole joinery, you are using the screws which are specially made for it. They are a washer head screw, and you need that extra head diameter to make sure that the screw doesn't pull through. I've tried doing this with regular wood screws, drywall screws, and literally what happens is that the screw pulls all the way through. Of course, I tried that as an experiment, okay? Okay, so there's the bottom attached. Okay, so now with the bottom secured, I've flipped it around, I'm doing the top. I also flipped it over because I had the back side up for doing the bottom to make sure my front came out flush, but my top's overhanging a little bit, so I had to put the back side down, okay? Now, before I was using a clamp just to pull everything in. I'm using a bar clamp again here because it appears that this board has a little bit of a twist in it. So I could either leave that twist in there or I can pull the board in so it's straight and secure it, and it'll stay that way. So that's another reason to clamp these things when you put them together, is making sure that you get things really the way you want them. I've worked with a lot of twisted lumber through the years. And really, if you're going to work with, whatever you get from the home improvement center or the lumber yard, specifically when we're talking about pine, you're going to have a real issue with wood that's either warped or twisted, and there are going to be times when you're going to have to find a way of dealing with that, specifically by clamping it and then drawing things into position, and then once you fasten them that way, they'll stay that way. So we're ready to put the shelves in now. The shelves are pretty easy. They're pretty much self-locating because of the supports that I put in for them before. All we got to do is put a little glue down, locate them, and I'm going to nail them in place. Now, again, it's not the nailing that is holding them and providing the strength. It is the glue. We all know that the glue is stronger than the wood, right? So, but I need something to hold it together while the glue is drying, and that's really what the nails are doing. If I was trying to use nails to hold this together, I would need something much bigger than the 18 gauge brad nails that I'm using to nail these shelves in. That's just really not enough strength. So, and my shelves do fit a little snug, especially this top one. The one thing I've got to do, though, manually, is make sure that I keep it flush with the sides, okay? The block, the support block, is going to make sure that it's in good shape as far as vertically, but as far as staying flush, well, I got to do that myself. And I just did a bad job of it. So before it's too late, drive that out, reposition it. We all make mistakes, It's, can we fix them? That's the trick. Okay, so now we'll let that glue dry a little bit and then put the back on and we'll be done. Okay, now we're up to the very last step, which is putting the back onto the shelf. And I'm going to be nailing this with staples rather than with brad nails. And the reason I'm doing that, I don't normally like using staples, but the staples will not pull through the wood like the brads could, okay? So it's a little more secure in that sense. And I'm adding a little bit of glue here, not a lot. I don't want to overdo it on the glue because I don't want it dripping down on the inside. The back serves more purpose than to just block off the view of whatever might be behind the shelves. It also adds strength. Now, a rectangle or square is really a very unstable shape. It has a real tendency for racking. In other words, instead of staying square, it'll tilt, okay, and go out of kilter on us. And the back helps prevent that. If you look at the way they frame a house, and of course framing a house is always rectangular, right? But they also put pieces in the corners, pieces of plywood specifically in the corners, to do the exact same thing that the back of this shelf is going to do, prevent the walls of the house from racking. Okay. Triangles are very strong shapes. Circles are very strong shapes. Squares and rectangles, not so much. I'll fix that later. Fortunately, I had another gun to switch to. So I'm stapling this about every 6 to 8 inches, coming down the sides. Remember, we've got glue in here as well. Now the other thing I'm going to do is go across the shelves. I'm not going to put a lot across the shelves, but a few. And before I started putting this on, I went ahead and made tick marks on the back of my shelf here so I know where the middle center line of the shelf is. Okay? This allows me to go ahead and put some brads through the back. I'm sorry, some staples through the back, literally right into the shelf. And I don't have to worry about missing it and making a whole bunch of holes in the back of my shelving unit, which, yeah, I've done that before. Okay, I'm going to let the glue dry before I set this up because there's a possibility, even with all this fully assembled, that it will rack a little bit as I'm lifting it up, and I don't want to pop any of my staples through the back. So we're going to let this sit, let the glue dry, and I've got a little problem in that my drill press is where this is supposed to be, so I got to move things around a little bit to make some place to put it. So here's my new shelving unit set in place between my toolbox and my router table. As you can see, I've left it natural. I tend to do that with shop furniture. I may change that and put a finish on it of some sort, but I really haven't decided. In the meantime, it can sit there, and as of course you can see, there's nothing on it yet. That won't take long. I'm sure it'll end up filled up pretty quickly. But the same idea, you know, granted, for shop furniture, I've built this a little better than I might otherwise do so, okay? It's a little nicer. It's a little more finished, but that's because I was showing how to make a shelf, okay? It's sturdy, and that's the main thing I want. And that's the main thing I'd want with a bookshelf as well. So something to keep in mind when you're building your own shelves for your own home is make sure you make it sturdy. It's worth putting a little extra material in there to get something that you know is going to be sure. So here it is, and who knows? Where do you need shelves? I mean, it seems to me everybody needs shelves in their house. Where can you put some shelves in, improve storage, maybe in the kitchen, maybe some bookshelves, who knows? Maybe even in your shop. So go out and make some sawdust and make yourself some shelves and improve the storage in your home and make your spouse happy at the same time.